Friday afternoon here on STV. The new series of Judge Rinder continues in half an hour. First, at 1:30, your latest lunchtime news and the weather.
Could higher taxes fill the gap in social care? Boris Johnson is expected to break a promise to voters and raise national insurance. Critics say a hike would disproportionately hit low earners and young people. Carers say they are desperate for help.
It's a sector that's been creaking for many years, very fragile post-COVID, and now it's critical. We're at a cliff edge moment.
Also this lunchtime, racist chanting and missiles directed at England players from hostile fans in Hungary. Gareth Southgate calls on FIFA to act. Plus, devastation in New York and New Jersey. At least 46 people are killed in floods. And after a surge in pet theft, new laws could see criminals face up to 7 years behind bars.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good afternoon. There is little dispute that the crisis in social care means more funding is needed for a sector on its knees. Where there is disagreement is about how to pay for it. It's expected that ministers will announce an increase to national insurance, but Labour argue that will affect the lower paid and the young disproportionately. That would also break Boris Johnson's manifesto promise not to raise taxes. Well, for those who look after the most vulnerable, there is one message: a decision must be reached, and quickly. Our political correspondent Libby Vina reports.
We clapped for them, but are we prepared to pay more tax for them? Ministers appear to be at odds over how much money is needed and where to get it from. But the director of this Sheffield care home says reform can't come soon enough. During the pandemic, she's had to close another home because she couldn't afford to keep it open.
I don't know of one provider at the moment who isn't absolutely screaming for, intervention and funding to solve the problem. It's not viable. It's a sector that's been creaking for many years, very fragile post-COVID, and now it's critical. We're at a cliff edge moment.
We will fix the crisis in social care once and for all.
It was one of his first pledges, but in the manifesto beforehand he also promised not to raise taxes, including national insurance. It seems that's a promise he's now prepared to risk breaking.
The British public know that reforming social care will come at a cost, and therefore it's important for all of us to be straight with the British public and work out a system that is genuinely sustainable for the future, rather than a sticking plaster that just won't deal with the issue.
You're not denying then that national insurance could rise?
Well, again, I'm not going to speculate as to the nuts and bolts of it. What I do know is it's important that we have a grown-up conversation about social care.
But some argue raising national insurance is unfair, as it targets those in work. It's only levied on wages and not other forms of income, and pensioners don't pay it.
People on lower incomes, younger workers, would really take the burden of this. People of working age do need social care at times, and that's an important point to consider. But however we find the resources to do this, there has to be an equitable distribution of that burden.
Maybe so, but it does seem ministers are poised to break one promise to deliver on another. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
England's 4-0 victory against Hungary last night has been overshadowed by the racist abuse faced by players. Gareth Southgate's men were booed from the terraces when they took the knee, and later Raheem Sterling and Jude Bellingham were targets of racist chants. Boris Johnson has condemned what happened and urged FIFA to take strong action, echoing the calls of the England manager.
It's never acceptable. Everybody knows I've said enough about racism over the last 2 years to know where I stand on it. But we also have to look at ourselves. We haven't got our own house in order. So I don't want to come here and make a big fuss about Hungary. But if it's happened, then action should be taken.
Joining us now is Troy Townsend from the anti-racism charity Kick It Out. Troy, thanks so much for talking to us this lunchtime. It wasn't that long ago, of course, that we were talking about that horrendous racist abuse suffered by England players following the Euros final. A lot of course, was on social media, but yet here we are once again. Your reaction to what happened last night?
Absolutely, yeah. Kind of expecting it. You know, you're watching the game, hoping, praying that the football will just be the football. It'll be the spectacle. But from the minute Raheem Sterling scored, you kind of anticipate the reaction, not just the missiles being thrown onto the football pitch, which should be investigated anyway, and the flares, but then also the acknowledgement that there was racial abuse and monkey chanting in the stadium. It was a high-profile game. It was a red list game for FIFA, and it kind of makes you concerned about why the game was held where it was held anyway, if they knew these kind of actions were going to take place.
Yeah, and that is the criticism levied at these football's governing bodies. In this case, it's FIFA for not doing enough. Now, particularly when we know that Hungary are already facing a sanction from UEFA, aren't they? 3 matches behind closed doors because of similar racist behaviour by fans.
Yeah, it just shows that there's not a joint up approach between the governing bodies. You know, Hungary in the Euro 2020 is obviously, you know, not just racist abuse, but homophobic banners, etc. And UEFA dealt with it, whether it's appropriately or not. We can decide. One of those 3 matches is suspended, by the way. So it's 2 matches, but yet they can have 60,000 in the ground yesterday to be able to start some of that abuse. And whilst we have to realise it's not the large majority of this stadium, they are being let down by those ultras, as they call them in Hungary, who are darkening their name, unfortunately.
And Troy, I have to ask you, let's just say, first of all, Hungary's manager has apologised for what happened last night. But the question is, we've got to look at the broader picture here. Why are we seeing this in football? We've just had the Olympics. We're currently enjoying the Paralympics, admittedly without a crowd because it's in Tokyo and during a pandemic. But it just seems to be happening in football more than any other sport. Why is this?
Because it's never effectively been dealt with in the game, you know, regardless of whether it's FIFA, UEFA. You know, Gareth Southgate mentioned there that we've still got our own problems here in England. So it's never really effectively been dealt with, and it's allowed to flourish and fester without fear, unfortunately. And, you know, FIFA have never appropriately dealt with some of these situations that are in the stadiums, and that's why there's no fear for those supporters from last night. You know, we're going back to the dark ages last night, you know, not just the missiles, etc., but like I said, the monkey chanting, which was audible. So, you know, we're waiting for them to be proactive. We're waiting them for the most severe punishment. But to be honest, do we believe that they're going to get it? Their statement this morning spoke about adequate actions. I don't know what that means. The Hungarian statement doesn't even mention racism. So that shows you what space we're in regards to dealing with this. And we'll wait with anticipation, but we'll see what happens once that the kind of, you know, they have kind of levelled what kind of punishments they will do at the Hungarian Federation.
All right, we shall wait and see. Troy Townsend, once again, thank you.
Thank you.
A member of the Islamic State group who grew up in London will spend the rest of his life in prison after pleading guilty to the murders of 4 American hostages. Alexander Cote is accused of belonging to an IS cell dubbed the Beatles, who were involved in kidnappings in Iraq and Syria. The families of the victims are in court to hear the plea, as was our US correspondent Emma Murphy.
Alexander Cote, an avowed member of ISIS, pleaded guilty today to all charges that were brought against him in the United States for his participation in a horrific hostage-taking scheme that resulted in the deaths of 4 U.S. citizens, as well as the deaths of British and Japanese nationals.
And so many miles from the Syrian battlefield where he was the one in judgment, a different justice for Alexander Cote. In the court of one of the countries he so despised, an admission of his guilt, but an absence of any obvious trace of it. As an ISIS militant, Cote was part of the so-called Beatles, a group of 4 from the UK who abducted journalists and aid workers. The details of what he did to them are as inhumane as the footage released of some of their deaths. To this day, many families still have no idea what became of their relatives or where their bodies lie. This plea deal means that Cote can return to the UK in 15 years to serve out his sentence.
But for that to even be a possibility, he's had to agree to speak with the families who wish to speak to him, to explain how he kidnapped their relatives, brutalised them and sent them to their deaths.
James Foley was one of those killed. His family were amongst those in court to see Cotie plead guilty.
This is the first time we'd ever seen Alexander Cotie. It was kind of rather sobering to think that any human being could have committed all the horrific things he pleaded guilty to.
Do you want to meet him?
I think so, because I guess it's hard for me to understand anyone like Alexander, and I do have some questions I'd like to ask of him, if I can summon the courage to.
Each family will have to make its own decision whether to meet him. Cotie will be given life rather than the death sentence. It's a justice he denied to those they grieve. Emma Murphy, ITV News in the United States.
And the daughter of one of the British victims of Alexander Cotie said she is pleased with the outcome but still needs closure. Speaking exclusively to ITV News, Bethany Haynes, daughter of murdered British aid worker David Haynes, said, "My family are really pleased with the outcome of the plea hearing. We're glad Alexander Cotie has finally admitted his guilt and justice will be served. It's been a hard few years and there will be hard times to come, but my family and I would like to bring my dad home to rest. We ask Cotie and Elskig, please give us the closure we desperately need and tell us what happened and where my dad's remains are." Well, a terrorist who stabbed 6 people in a supermarket in New Zealand has been shot dead by police. 3 of those injured at the Auckland store are fighting for their lives in hospital. The attacker had been under police surveillance for some time. New Zealand's Prime Minister described him as a lone wolf inspired by extremist ideology. At least 46 people have now been killed across 4 US states in the devastation caused by the remnants of a hurricane. There has been flash flooding across New York, New Jersey, Connecticut and Pennsylvania. President Biden warned the climate crisis is here. Noel Phillips reports.
Leaving behind a trail of destruction and devastation, Hurricane Ida unleashed record-breaking flash floods and tornadoes up and down the East Coast. In New York City, a 2-year-old boy was among the dozens of deaths. The state of New Jersey felt the full force of the extreme conditions, with winds of up to 165 miles per hour.
Look! Embarrassed! You have rain boots!
Ashley survived by hiding in her basement with her 2 children as her home collapsed around her.
My house was falling on my back over my 2 small children. It was awful.
So you and your family were trapped inside?
In the basement, yeah, where you're supposed to be. We're supposed to be safe.
8 months pregnant, Ashley and her family have been left with nothing.
There's the crib that we just put together for the new baby. And my daughter's bedroom. They're gone. It's awful.
Behind me is the misery after the mayhem. This house, along with so many others here in this New Jersey community, have all had their roofs and walls ripped off. And all that remains now are piles of rubble. President Biden says climate change is to be blamed for the extreme weather.
The past few days of Hurricane Ida and the wildfires in the West and the unprecedented flash floods in New York and New Jersey is yet another reminder that these extreme storms and the climate crisis are here.
Along with the cleanup come the rescue missions. Such extreme weather calls for extraordinary efforts. Help like the storm itself, often coming from the skies. Noel Phillips, ITV News, New Jersey.
Still to come, how the government plans to stem the rise in pet theft. Plus, more golds in Tokyo take Great Britain's Paralympic medals tally past the 100 mark. But first, cases of COVID-19 in Scotland have doubled in the last week. 1 in 75 people now have the virus. That is up from 140 last week. In England, cases are stable. 1 in 70 people have the virus. Well, Charanpreet Kaur is here to talk us through the numbers. And that's a pretty big jump in Scotland, isn't it?
Absolutely, Lucrezia. I mean, that's really striking that figures have doubled in Scotland from about 1 in 140 people having the virus last week to around 1 in 75 now. And that means the country's experiencing its highest positivity rate ever recorded. Now, in a way, that's to be expected. Kids went back to school a few weeks ago in Scotland, and there's always a lag before those real-time events show up in the data. But in England, where, as you say, cases are relatively stable, kids are just going back to school this week, and so that won't be showing up in the data yet. So this increase in Scotland could be a sign of things to come across the rest of the UK, especially when we factor in things like cold weather, more mixing and vaccine efficacy reducing over time.
Yeah, so we'll be looking at those numbers in a couple of weeks' time, but also still hesitancy among younger people taking up the vaccine as well.
That's right, and there's been some more research into that. Obviously, that's only some young people, not all of them, but the reasons have stayed the same. It's things like worries about fertility and mistrust of government, and this feeling of, I'm fit and healthy, why should I bother? What will be interesting to watch, though, is how that might change when not having a vaccine bars you from places like clubs and gigs, as the government is planning to introduce by the end of the month. We've got two important JCVI decisions coming up. They're the committee that decides who gets vaccinated. First of all, booster jabs, and second of all, vaccinations for children aged 12 to 15. Now, both of those will be absolutely crucial for containing cases in the coming weeks and months.
All right, Charanpreet, thank you. A new criminal offence for pet abduction is set to be introduced as the government plans to tackle a rise in pet theft. A report found that 7 in 10 of the animal thefts recorded by the police involved dogs. Evidence suggests that around 2,000 dog theft crimes were reported in 2020 and that the sale price of some breeds increased by as much as 89% over lockdown, making dog theft more appealing to criminals looking to profit. Well, the new law will recognise the welfare of animals and that pets are valued as more than property. Well, I'm now joined by Claire Calder from Dogs Trust, which welcomed the move but says many more dogs will be stolen before the plans come into effect. Claire, thanks so much for joining us. It is true, isn't it? Something the Dogs Trust and other animal charities have been pushing for a long time, because animals, pets, in the eyes of the law as it stands, are just property, but they mean so much to their owners, so much more than that.
It's so true. I think pet theft is just particularly heartbreaking. Dogs, as we know, are part of the family. And I think at the moment, pet owners have particularly relied on the companionship that dogs can provide throughout the pandemic as well. So the thought of having your dog abducted or stolen is just absolutely terrifying. So we are hugely welcoming of the announcement today that the government is looking to introduce a new offence for pet abduction. So as you say, at the moment, pets are viewed as property in the eyes of the law when it comes to theft. So this will really recognise the emotional impact and the trauma that it can have on families having their pets stolen. And we hope to see much tougher sentences as a result.
The reality is, though, people, gangs, they're targeting not just puppies, it's older dogs, older animals as well. They can get a significant amount of money. Do you think that this tougher penalties, for example, longer time or jail terms, will actually work as a deterrent?
We really hope so. So at the moment, there just isn't sufficient deterrent for thieves. As you say, huge amounts of profits can be made from selling dogs at the moment, especially since COVID-19, when we just saw prices skyrocket during the lockdown and in the months afterwards. So there's a huge amount of profit that can be made. And unfortunately, the penalties that are currently available don't reflect the severity of the crime. So we really hope to see much tougher sentences so that hopefully we can deter criminals from stealing and abducting dogs.
And Claire, briefly, if you can, but the law hasn't come into effect yet. For people who do have pets, what should they be doing? They should be taking care, shouldn't they?
Yeah, so it's really, really important to make sure that your dog is microchipped and all the details are up to date on the microchip. That will be really helpful if the worst happens in helping to be reunited with your dog. There's lots of other things to do as well. Make sure that your home and garden are secure. Don't leave your dog unattended outside or in the garden. Make sure they're always inside. And if you're walking your dog off lead as well, make sure it can, it's got recall and you can see it at all times.
Good advice, but we're out of time. Claire, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, Great Britain has passed the 100 medal mark at the Paralympics on a successful day on the track and in the water. Sergio Carrier reports.
Owen Miller has put on a burst around the outside, and it's Great Britain's Owen Miller with 100 metres to go who leads at the moment.
It was his first Paralympics and he was a rank outsider heading into the T20 1500 metres. But in a brilliantly timed late burst on the final lap, Owen Miller sprinted to first place and the gold medal.
I felt excited and nervous at the same time, but I just done my own thing and I stick to my training and I've done my best.
A gold medal in the VAR.
On the water, Great Britain's Emma Wiggs paddled to canoe glory, winning the KLT kayak event.
V for victory for Emma Wiggs of Great Britain.
Landing gold in the first ever women's VLT event at the Paralympics. And with the season's best performance, GB's Jonathan Broome-Edwards claimed his first Paralympic title in the T64 high jump, a win that meant so much after serious injuries threatened his progress.
I feel like a blubbery mess. Like that meant a lot. The last 5 years, excuse the pun, I've had a lot of ups and downs, and coming back from an injury so big, like forcing my way back.
But it is the end of a Paralympic career for five-time champion Ellie Simmonds. After missing out on a medal in her final race in Tokyo, she announced her retirement.
I'm looking forward to going home, see my family. I think I'll take a few days break and just evaluate and then see what the future holds.
Owen Miller from Dunfermline.
With Great Britain winning 3 gold medals and passing the 100 medal mark, it's been a sensational day 10. Casualty, ITV News.
Great stuff. I'm back at 6:30, but for now, bye-bye.